6:37, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Good morning to you. Man, the devastation, just real quick before we get to Matthew Hurtt, the devastation in North Carolina and East Tennessee. I mean, it is just stunning. The second deadliest storm on record. Helene flood waters, and we've got parts of 40 closed. Coming up in the 7 o'clock hour at 7:06, Robbie Starbuck is teaming up with Elon Musk to get those folks internet and Starlink devices out there. And so Robbie, I guess, is working. I mean, I was talking to Robbie yesterday on the phone, and he's telling me that he and Elon are speaking about getting Starlink out there to make sure that everybody can communicate. So Robbie's doing great work. He's going to join us coming up at about 7:06 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 at WTN. Right now on the Newsmaker Hotline, Matthew Hurtt is joining us, and our grassroots political analyst. And Matthew, always great to have you on. I want to start out this segment playing some audio from CNN where they do declare J.D. Vance is the winner.
I think there was a clear lack of preparation and execution here on Walz's part.
I think actually it's the opposite. I think he had too much preparation.
Maybe, yeah.
He had so many lines that he was clearly trying to say that he didn't listen and said when J.D. Vance said one of the many things he really hit Kamala Harris on, not Tim Walz, but Kamala Harris, he didn't respond because he clearly had things in his mind. I think the lack of interviews that he has done with national media, with local media, it showed. He needed more reps.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, J.D. Vance is much more experienced at this, at public speaking, at defending himself, at pivoting.
Yeah, that is Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, among others. Matthew Hurtt, what do you think?
Dan, we witnessed a triple homicide on national television last night. You and I have spoken about this at length in the past. J.D. Vance, in one-on-one interviews with Dana Bash and others on national television, consistently knocks it out of the park, and he did even better last night. It was funny watching the headlines beforehand. Outlets like Politico and others were already preparing the American public to tamp down or to play down Tim Walz's performance, and it was an absolute just embarrassment for Kamala Harris's campaign. J.D. Vance did a great job, and this is exactly what you and I have talked about for weeks on showcasing J.D. Vance, putting him front and center and giving him an opportunity to communicate to the American people.
I think part of what was going on, first of all, the visual of Tim Walz constantly and furiously taking notes, right? And so you look at him, he's on the right-hand side of the screen, and he's getting all like flustered, and he's getting red, and he just looks agitated. And he's like frustratingly taking notes, and you're looking at J.D. Vance, and he's just calm, cool, and collected. I think part of what happened yesterday, and I've mentioned this a couple of times already today, is that the American people have been sold this boogeyman that is J.D. Vance, you know, the architect of Project 2025 and all that stuff. They've really sold him as a guy who is, you know, really just a bad dude. And so then he comes out and he's cordial, he's smart, he's articulate, he's calling for peace in the world. And so J.D. Vance had the ability to show that no, he's not the guy that has been demonized in the media so much. And he came out and told America exactly who he is, exactly who Donald Trump is, and exactly what the benefit is of mega values.
And Tim Walz looked frustrated, and in the split screen, you could see the comfort that J.D. Vance had on stage. We had this situation with no audience, there at the debate, but the audience was the American people, and there were a couple of times where J.D. Vance looked directly into the camera. And I'll tell you this, my girlfriend, who is not political at all, caught most of the debate, and she looked at the TV and she goes, "Oh my goodness, J.D. Vance has beautiful eyes." And I know that seems kind of silly, but for people who want to humanize the attacks on J.D. Vance and Donald Trump by the left and by folks in the media to dehumanize them, that was a moment where J.D. Vance entered into the living rooms of millions of Americans And not only was he articulate and his arguments were well organized, but also he was charming and disarming in a way that reached those non-political voters who may have tuned in live and those who certainly will tune in the clips and posts after the debate.
I think there were a lot of viral clips. One of the things that I said last night during our pre-debate coverage is J.D. Vance is really good at making complicated political ideas very short and concise. And he did that last night. And you folks know how much I love and appreciate Donald Trump, and I support him. But J.D. Vance is, I would say right now in today's medium, I think that he is a better communicator of MAGA values when it comes to this kind of a format. And so for J.D. Vance, I mean, again, he was very articulate. Then there was Tim Walz.
So I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was the NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety.
So, yeah, he said that he had...
So I've become friends with school shooters.
Friends with school shooters. Is he ever going to live that down?
You know, I often say, and I have said, that VP debates don't make a lot of difference because most of the time they don't really stick out. But this debate may be all the difference, not only for a gaffe like what Walz said about school shooters, but also the fact, and this is something that we don't often see in our politics, on a number of occasions, J.D. Vance said, well, I agree with you, Tim Walz, or I think that's a good point. And there was a congeniality that we don't see in our politics by our politicians quite often. And I think that played into and will allow independent voters, moderates, suburban women, and others to say, you know what, again, this is a likable guy, and it's somebody that I can trust, given the policies that are going on in Washington. So certainly the gaffes by Tim Walz, but also the opportunities that J.D. Vance took, not only to make very well thought out arguments. I thought his appeal, his emotional appeal on abortion, was very important, but also the totality of his ability to be warm and inviting in what were very policy heavy comments that he made.
So Daily Mail poll, half or 50% said they intended to back Harris and Walz. That figure went down by 1 percentage point as a result of the debate. So they were at 50%. Now they're at 49% directly as a result of Tim Walz and his very poor debate performance. Now, I guess the question is, and this is where we left off, you know, voters in Pennsylvania, which by most, if not all accounts, from people that know things, this election will be decided in Pennsylvania. How do you think people in battleground states took this debate?
1 percentage point may not seem significant, but that accounts for tens of thousands of voters in places like Pennsylvania, in places like Virginia, where it's a 3-point race, in places like Michigan and Arizona. And it is significant in the scope of, again, appealing to those independents, those who are tuning in late in the game. That is not something you'd shake a stick at, this 1 percentage point, because some of these states will be decided by a 0.5 point to 1.5 points. And we will go, what we'll see now post VP debate is increased coverage of J.D. Vance. Much of it will be positive. Much of it will even be maybe neutral, what we see on CNN. Some of it will be hair on fire, like what we see on MSNBC. But all of that goes into a narrative that is now shifted after this debate in favor of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. So it's very significant in states like Pennsylvania, where this race will come down to 1 or 2 percentage points.
I think the term I want to use is befuddled. Would you say that is the proper way to define Tim Walz and his performance last night, befuddled?
It seemed as though the CNN clip that you played before the break said that he was over-prepared. I did notice that he had too many lines that he wanted to get out that just didn't fit into the conversation, that just didn't fit into the debate. But he looked confused, and he looked, I saw a number of folks on Twitter who showed the eyes wide open emoji,
yes,
sort of his reaction. And again, in contrast, the split screen a very comfortable and confident J.D. Vance. It is sort of like the Kennedy and Nixon debate in the sense that there is a stark distinction on camera of which candidate looked better prepared. And again, I think in the minds of those voters who are still trying to decide, this was a significant win for J.D. Vance.
I think he goes in, Tim Walz, he goes in and he's already wounded. We know a couple of things. Number one, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance wind in their sails, right? We know that there's inside polling that shows the Democrats and Kamala Harris are not doing well. Then, of course, I mean, with all the lies that he is told, he got caught lying about stolen valor, bringing firearms into combat zones, all of these things. And then he gets caught lying about being in China during Tiananmen Square. And they asked him the question, and they had to ask him twice.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests, went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
I purposely left the silence in because it's just, I mean, you can cut the awkward with a knife.
And rarely are these conversations, or rarely are minds made up based on one issue. It is a culmination of things that voters realize. You might say it's death by 1,000 cuts. And I think about 700 of those cuts took place last night on national television. It was a significant show to the American people that Tim Walz is just not prepared for the role of vice president, that there are too many things. He seemed as a politician for the last 15 or 20 years to have relied on lying and inflating his personal history, and that came back to bite him surely last night.
Well, and the last thing I'll say about this is that he also cannot defend Kamala Harris's policies or her flip-flopping. 4 or 5 years ago, she was all about, transgender surgeries for kids. That is exactly where Tim Walz lands as well. She can't defend the border. She can't defend the economy. And so he goes in wounded. And so if Donald Trump wins this election, and every day I am more and more confident, if Trump wins this election, then I believe that great for our side. But I think that this shows that J.D. Vance has an incredible political career ahead of him. And I believe the political career of Tim Walz is done. I think he's done.
Many pundits panned J.D. Vance when Donald Trump selected him as sort of a puppet to Donald Trump, and we saw last night that is not the case. That J.D. Vance is his own man. He makes strong arguments, and he's really an impressive individual when it comes to communicating that America First policy agenda, which came about in 2015 and 2016 in the first Trump administration.
All right, so Matthew, I got to ask, and I'm running out of time, but what is your prediction? We've got 35 days? Is that what it is? Till election day. What do you think is going to happen?
I don't like making predictions because I hate being wrong.
That's why I asked you a prediction. That's because that's why I did that.
I will predict that voters will be energized by last night's debate performance, that J.D. Vance will swing a few folks over to our side, and that'll make a critical impact in places like Pennsylvania.
All right, Matthew, how can folks find you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter at Matthew Hurtt, MatthewHurtt.